When you go pretty much anywhere in North America, it is hard not to think about the civilization that was here thousands of years prior to ours. This episode isn't so much about Galveston, but rather Galveston Bay and the entire coastline of the United States. Now let's take a step back a few thousand years and look at the Native Americans who used to live all along Galveston Bay and even on Galveston Island. I wanted to come out west to really give you guys a good idea of what the entire coastline of Texas would have looked like back before European settlement. Oh my God. Okay, I thought this video was gonna be fun to film in the first place without this obstacle. Look at this bridge that I'm gonna have to cross at the Galveston Island State Park. The tide is so high today, it is absolutely insane. So I'm taking my running shoes off and I'm about to cross this waterway right here. All right, here we go. Welcome to Galveston Unscripted. Thank you to our video sponsor, The Daily News, bringing you the news since 1842. Support your local newspaper, The Daily News. This is crazy. Oh my God. Are we gonna make it? I think so. I can't imagine like being out in the park and then having the tide come in like this and you gotta cross this little bridge. This is wild. Wow. This is so cool. Who would have thought it would have been better to wear flip-flops to the state park? We're gonna be looking into Shell Middens. Now, one thing we have in Galveston Bay and bays all over the Gulf Coast are oysters. Tons and tons of oysters. Now, Shell Middens are basically refuse piles for Native Americans living anywhere near water where they could source clams, fish, oysters, you name it, and throw it in a big trash pile. So they catch their oysters and then pile them up right along the shoreline. And these shell middens can be found all over the coastline of the United States, including interior waterways. Now, I am down at the Galveston Island State Park. Let's just take a moment to appreciate how flat and barren everything is out here. Besides these coastal grasses, small shrubs, and abundant wildlife, there's really not much out here. And since the tide is so high today in Galveston Bay, you can actually see the bay water encroaching up onto Galveston Island. Now, out here on the west end, the elevation is very, very low, giving us a good idea of what the entire Gulf Coast would have looked like just a couple hundred years ago. Prior to European settlements popping up all along the Gulf Coast, there were multiple Native American tribes living along Galveston Bay. And for literally thousands of years, this was their home. And if you think about it, it really makes sense. Instead of having to go and hunt for big game every single day, you could go into Galveston Bay, go fishing, or go pluck out oysters and eat your fill. The one interesting thing about gathering oysters along Galveston Bay for thousands of years is that the oyster shells would begin to accumulate in what are now known as shell middens. The bones, shell, and pottery found in shell middens give us amazing insight to what day-to-day life was like for Native Americans in this area. And every shell midden is different. These shell middens could be absolutely gigantic, being over 50 feet wide and over 10 feet tall. Here are some photos from a shell midden research project at Armand Bayou Nature Center just up the road from Galveston Island. Now, what is consistently found next to these large shell middens are Native American burial sites. Shell middens have given researchers amazing insight to Native American lifestyle and coastal ecology in this area. The consistency of shell middens could tell you a lot about the diet and the coastal ecology based on the shells, bones, broken pottery, and even weapons found in shell middens. You could learn a lot about what was going on here thousands of years ago. For instance, Galveston Bay is brackish, which means the salinity level goes up or down depending on the rivers, the rain, or saltwater inundation from the Gulf of Mexico. And that salinity level has changed drastically over time. Depending on the amount of freshwater clams found in the shell middens or oyster shells, you can really tell what the salinity was like. Oysters really love salt water, and freshwater clams obviously love freshwater. So of course, as you go further up the rivers and bayous, you're gonna get more and more freshwater clams. You may be asking, why am I just walking around and not showing you any shell middens? Well, it is notoriously difficult to find shell middens here on Galveston Island. One reason being, when Native Americans would stack up these shells to create a midden, that would be right along the edge of the water of Galveston Bay. Over the past few hundred or thousand years, coastal erosion has taken a toll, washing away tons of shell middens here along the bay side. But another reason has to do with the population growth of Galveston in the late 1800s. Galveston's early roads were simply made of sand, considering this is just a barrier island in the first place. But after heavy rains, horses and carriages would get stuck in that sand. I'm gonna hide behind this tree to get out of the wind. Before wooden block or brick roads were installed in Galveston, the next logical choice would be rocks or oyster shell. Now, Galveston doesn't have many rocks. I mean, it's literally a sandy sandbar, and sourcing rocks from off the island would have been expensive. But what Galveston did have were thousands of years worth of shell middens all along Galveston Bay. So from the mid to late 1800s, many of the shell middens all along Galveston Bay were relocated to Galveston streets. Now, of course, there are definitely remnants of shell middens on Galveston Island today. Due to development and erosion, they are just much harder to find. Now, during construction projects all over the island over the past 2 centuries, shell middens have been uncovered. Countless artifacts have been unintentionally redistributed all over the island and the state of Texas. Now, state and national parks, as well as conservation areas, don't often share the location of shell middens within the boundaries of their park. And this is to maintain the integrity of that shell midden, as it can be used for research for decades to come. So when you roam around Galveston Island today, just remember we are not the first civilization to call this place home, and we probably won't be the last. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, and follow us on all social media. We are everywhere. And if you haven't yet, go check out the podcast. We've got hours and hours of historical content on that podcast feed. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Galveston Unscripted.